I don't want this to. All right, welcome everybody. This is I believe, the fourth. No, it's the third. It's the third drunk
Yeah.
interview, and I have Dimitri here with me. So I am drinking this Michelob Ultra. It's got some lime in it. And Dimitri, you want to tell us what you're drinking?
Yeah, I'm drinking Dutch beer, Hertog Jan. It's nice and sugary. It's yeah.
Okay, so
Mm.
there were several things that got brought up before we decided to start this live, and a couple of things was the master-student relationship, and then you were telling me about how you disagree on one of my videos, right? About the master, and so now I'm really I'm saving this space here because I want to hear what is it that you
Yeah.
disagree on.
Yeah. Um, well, I had a talk with Cadel today,
Yeah.
and we talked about the relationship from student and master, and he told me about three moments in the relationship. You can have a relationship towards a dead master, like Freud, Rilke, Hegel, whoever it be. And then next moment is the relationship with an actual living master, which is more traumatic because they can respond, uh, and you can also project. And then the third moment is the master student or master slave relationship in yourself. The question of how do I become an authentic master towards myself. So where do I disagree with your video? Let me first say that I don't enjoy this act of saying I disagree. People love that. They love to say, "Oh, there's a me, and I disagree with that."
Mhm.
Um, but it seems like, and this was before I had to talk with Cadel, that there it's easier to have a master who's dead because they cannot respond, and in that sense, um, that's I guess where my disagreement lies. But disagreement is, it sounds very bombastic and controversial, um, so I don't want to necessarily say that. So if that makes sense.
I mean, it makes sense. Um, it's kind of like, I mean, if we can even think about this in theological terms, right? Why is it difficult for people to have a relationship with a God that you can't imagine in some type of human form, right? Like,
Mm.
you have to have, like, Jesus Christ is like the perfect example to have this human relationship, because if not, then we can't relate to a God that is so unreachable, so unknowable. Um, so for me, I mean, for me, I guess it just depends, you know. It just depends. Like, I, I think I think it is I think it is traumatic, the living one, but you could say, for the reason why I kind of moved on to like hidden masters and dead masters is because I already went through not a living master per se, but the very trauma of like unrequited love. Because that's ultimately what that relationship is.
Unrequited? What the?
Unrequited love meaning, like, whatever, like, you love the person so much, but they're not gonna give it back to you,
Okay, yeah,
right? So
yeah.
even though, like, Cadell is not wrong, I want to abstract that further into a broad category of, like, it transcends even the idea of master student, because what we're talking about really is the trauma of unrequited, unacknowledged love. Like, it's a love that's not going to be returned the same way that you're giving it.
Okay, yeah.
Right. So it's like, for me, I've gone through that many times. Right. For me, the women that I've loved were like my living masters, basically. Right. Even though knowledge wise, it wasn't like explicit teaching, but it was like implicit teaching about no matter what I do and how much I admire them, it's not going to return back to me. So in this case, he is correct. It is more traumatic. And that's why I focus on the sort of hidden master, the dead master, because I feel like that is the step towards recognizing the hidden master within yourself, right?
Okay. It's like a short circuit between the first and third moment in that way.
Yeah. So I mean, I'm not denying that it's not necessary. It is necessary to go through that trauma. You have to go through that trauma. But it doesn't necessarily have to be like a specific master student. It doesn't have to be a specific student master relationship. You know what I mean? It can be like, another way to look at it is like lover and loved, right? You love this person, you admire this person so much, but no matter what you do, there seems to be like a failure in the reciprocation. Like, it's not doesn't go back to you for some reason, and it doesn't go back into the same intensity that you feel towards this person, right? Because ultimately, when you love a person so much, you want to be recognized by them to some degree, right? And so that's what causes like the frustrations. It's like, yes, yeah. I want you to, like, because I like you so much, I want you to acknowledge me in some fashion, and so on. But again, I feel like this is just the beginning of understanding that there is no absolute other, so to say. Like, for example, your relationship with Cadell, right? The reason why you could say you admire Cadell is because actually there's something that you don't recognize that is Cadell in you, if that makes any sense, right?
Can you elaborate on that? I can't.
I'll try to elaborate on that. It's kind of difficult. So
yeah, I bet. Yeah.
Okay, so what I'm saying is that, often this gets reduced to self-identification, right? Like, oh, I am identifying with my master. But it's not complete, in my opinion, it's not completely, there is something about your willingness to self-identify with the master that shows something to be true about yourself, right? So that means, like, okay, I'll give you an example, right? One time I was in love with this girl that she I don't know how to explain it, but she like loved simple things. Like, she had a way of talking about ordinary things that was like beautiful to me. Like, I never looked at it that way, like the way that she would talk about just simple things about life. And she made it beautiful for some reason. But what I realized is that the things that I love about her are actually things that I have not recognized in myself. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. So the reason why you could say it's traumatic is because it forces you, and this is where Hegel comes in, it forces you to go back into yourself.
Yeah.
And that's why I'm saying that, like, even though you admire Cadell, there is something of you that is basically Cadell. that it wants to be recognized, but what you are mistaking is that you're saying, oh, I want Cadell to recognize me, right? But actually what is being said is that there is something inside you that wants to be recognized.
By myself.
Yes, yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Does that make sense now?
It does make sense. It does make sense. It's yeah, it does make a lot of sense because it's this idea about recognition. Want to be recognized, and I'm reminded of Lacan's concept of the objet petit a, and how he posited outside of us, and then it drives us towards desiring recognition, or whatever it be in a lover. I'm actually reminded of a meme of this little, now what's the English word, this little insect, and you know how insects always fly to the light.
Yeah.
And then this little insect is looking at the light, and he's saying, maybe the point of the search for the light is to find the light within myself.
Yeah.
And isn't that what you're getting at?
Yeah.
To have
Basically.
this flame and drive within yourself.
Because it's very easy to mistake attraction in the way it works. And that's something that I've learned just through experience, that and that's why I talked about in my video that it's not enough, right? To like use Cadell as an example. It's not enough just to admire him, because where did he get all of his inspiration from? Right? What the whole point of what my video was to show you that even though that living master is there in flesh, he is the embodiment of all the dead masters before him.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Right? So
Yeah.
So that's why it's like, it's not enough, and it's never going to be enough to get recognized by Cadell. What you have to do is you have to go through Cadell, meaning go through where did he get his inspirations from, right? And obviously, and this might even go back to your answer about why you're reading Hegel. But I know that his inspirations lie in, was it Nietzsche and Hegel? At least that's some of the two, and then Zizek and Lacan, right? So it's like, if you want a better grasp of this inspiration and admiration, you have to chase all those thinkers. And then what's interesting about that is that once you're chasing all those thinkers, you're going to discover something about yourself. What do you feel about that? How do you feel about that?
Yeah, I feel like once you get into Hegel, he's inescapable. The question of how do we sublate Hegel, for example? How do we get beyond Hegel? So that involves a negation. But then you still have some kind of relationship towards Hegel. So how do we not even talk about Hegel? That would be the real overcoming of Hegel. Not even talking about him anymore. Anyway, I haven't even read the book, The Phenomenology, but hearing Cadell and other philosophers talk about Hegel and his inescapability, that really attracts me toward it. I feel like since philosophy is an interest of mine that I do in my free time, that if I have told myself the idea that if I read the Phenomenology of Spirit and use that as a base for whatever future developments are going to come in the years, that will be a good base no matter what. no matter what direction I will go, and I'm willing to leave it all behind. That's what I consciously say, but I really feel like I stand by that.
What do you mean by leaving it all behind?
By the going through and seeing what is at the other side, not as an identification of, oh, I'm a Hegelian
Mm.
and I like to talk to other Hegelians or whatever that be. It's ultimately a search for self discovery. Um, yeah, that's part of the reason why I'm reading Hegel.
Okay. What's interesting about the Hegelian thing is that as much as I like Hegel, like I like Hegel in general, I do. But for me, he always kind of represents like the Western side of thinking, where when and this is the part where I guess where I started my reading group on Ibn Arabi, because I feel like Ibn Arabi is the Eastern side of if there ever was an Arabic Hegel, it would be Ibn Arabi, because he also expands on Spinoza's concepts before Spinoza even existed. That's the interesting part. And then there's also this idea of like circular, like this. It's a big ontological thing, but like everything's like a circle. It always like goes back. But then there's like
Hmm.
ontological levels within that circle, within that circle, within that circle. So it is
Hmm.
kind of like a spiral, like the
Yeah,
Hegelian.
seems like a recursive
Yeah, exactly, like
fractal
the Hegelian
thing.
circle,
Yeah.
and the Hegelian spiral. So um, that's why I'm so fascinated by this, because it's like, a lot of the West talks about Hegel, but then there's, I feel like the Eastern contester, which is just as uh, in depth and deep, that I think we're still trying to translate even his biggest work ever, and it still hasn't been fully translated because it's so freaking big. Um, and it shows like there's a lot of missing knowledge. There's a lot of missing knowledge that the West doesn't have because we haven't translated it yet. We're still trying to work through the translation. Um, and so, but for me, I like having both. I like having both. I like reading Hegel and I like reading Ibn Arabi. Um, and it seems like that's where I like to pull myself, for my own self journey, you know? So, uh, but I think, for you, trace that inspiration thread as far as you can go, you know, as far as it can go. Because I do feel like it's going to lead back into yourself. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah. No, it makes a lot of sense. It
Mhm.
does.
So do you think that there's like a hidden teacher within you?
Is there a hidden teacher within me?
Yeah.
You know, definitely, yes. Yeah, no doubt. Yeah, yeah. I yesterday I had some contact with him because yesterday I went to a cafe and I read some Hegel, and then it was a beautiful day outside, so I went to a park and I put my phone away and everything, and I just decided to sit there and meditate. And at the end I sat there for 3 hours just meditating and observing totally spontaneously. And um, we are all addicted to the phones and the Instagrams and Facebooks, whatever. Um, Massively so for myself too. And I sat there for 3 hours and things happened. People walked by. Some people sat on the bench. They went away. Some other people went, and it was so rich. Like it was so rich with content and depth. Um, yeah, just also even the emotion of hunger, or like the feeling of hunger, or just being with your face in the sun and feeling this sunlight rejuvenate you in some sense. Seeing someone smoke at the other side, or something like that. Put these things into words. Poetry can do.
Sorry, you cut off. You're cutting off, Dimitri. Let's see. Oh. Dimitri, you still there? Because I think you lost connection. He talks about phones and then, oh, there he is. Let's see if I can.
Okay.
There you go.
Can you see me?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Where did I cut off?
Let's just go back to you talking about you're meditating. All the content was filling up and stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah. You want your friend Joseph says hi.
Yeah. I out like hours. Okay. Yeah. So what I'm saying is that it was very rich, and
Oh.
I haven't even researched like the surface level of this meditative space, but I feel like the level of the body and meditation is from what I've seen, the deepest I can go in self discovery. In a way, I don't want to exclude it as the way. It's one of the ways.
I mean, I don't disagree with you because I feel like a lot of the dead teachers that I have talk about this solitude. And there's even a quote by Kafka about all you need to do is sit at your desk and just listen, and the content will just like come to you, right? So it kind of reminds me of that really like funny saying about when the student is ready, the teacher appears. I feel like that's exactly how it works when we're going through this deep listening with the world, sitting down and just meditating. That the hidden master sort of appears when we are wanting to attend to it. And it's strange because I feel like when you were talking about it, it instantly feels way more satisfying doing that than kind of, I guess, looking for like a living master, How do you feel? How do you feel about that?
Yeah, I watched some talk. I love Osho.
Oh, okay.
I watched some talk by him this week, and he was talking about meditation as as a motion of mirroring. You know, a mirror just reflects neutrally. It doesn't judge negatively or positively. It just reflects back. And I feel like if you do have an authentic master, which you use to go through him in an open-ended way, that he can be a kind of meditative mirror for you. He throws you back to yourself.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I don't disagree with that.
Yeah, and that's it's a very unconventional way of thinking about meditation as a transferential relationship between a student and a master. But as we know, Osho was like, so many people had crazy transference for him, and was totally deified, and he kept trying to throw everyone back to themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's funny because I'm reading Henry Corbin's Alone with the Alone, and it's his interpretation of Ibn Arabi. And basically it's like there's always this concept of the mirror going on, where uh, the task is to realize that the worshipped is the worshiper, and vice versa. Does that make sense? The worshiper
Yeah, it
is
does.
the
Yeah,
worshipped.
yeah.
So there's always this self-reflecting back. Um, but for Henry Corbin's case, it's we are the mirrors for God. And the task would be that we have to sort of uh, like we have to sort of wipe those mirrors to make it more clear, basically.
Hmm.
Um, because it's the way Henry Corbin puts it, and the way Ibn Arabi puts it, is that creation exists because God yearns for himself to be recognized. And the only way that he can
Okay.
be recognized is through us. But we have to do the sort of clearing up and become mirrors for God himself. So there's a very famous Sufi saying that says, I was a treasure unknown, and I wish to be known. So it begins already with God wanting to see himself through the other, and that's why he creates us. So it's a very interesting aspect of how to look at this. I think Joseph, your friend Joseph, is saying that he's saying, my bro Dimitri. And Joseph says here, this makes sense. I was watching a talk on how God is what you give your attention to. Yeah, no, that makes sense, because I've been reading the Bible recently, and there's a verse that says, wherever you put your treasure, that's where your heart lies. And it talks about you need to put your treasure in heaven, which we can always interpret this symbolically. What is heaven in this case?
Now, is it not I, there's this Bible verse. I believe it's in the book of Luke. It says that the kingdom of God is within you.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that
that's
is.
the answer.
See, that for me, that is like the real master, making contact with that. Because everything else is just going to be traumatic and painful. But it's necessary, though, to discover that all this is traumatic and painful. Was it my favorite teacher is Rilke, right? Rilke writes in one of his poems from the Duino Elegies that sadness is our source of progress, because sadness is something that always forces us to go back into ourselves,
Hmm.
right? That means when we are sad, there's a failing that we did. We did some type of failure in our progress, but it's not all lost because it always makes us revert back to what is true. But the thing is, we have to think about what is true
Yeah.
in the midst of our sadness and yearning. And so that's why all these failures, all these failed recognitions bring us sadness, because it keeps showing us that, like, that's not it. That's not it. And that's not it, right? So you're still like progressing in some fashion. You just have to think about what it is that it keeps pointing you back to. I see you thinking about this a lot.
Yeah, I'm yeah. I'm fascinated by this this dimension.
Because like I think the world gets it wrong when they say that sadness is a negative emotion. I don't think sadness is something that should be avoided. Sadness
Yeah.
sadness points to something. The question is always, what is your sadness pointing to? Right? Because sadness will obviously show us that what we want, we can't have. Right?
Exactly.
So then it's obviously pointing at something else. So then what is that something else? Right? And that is the power, and that is the knowledge of being in that sadness, in my opinion. That's what I learned from reading Rilke and going through my own pains.
Yeah. Yeah, I am a bit sadness.
Mm. Do you think how do you think this relates to becoming a man?
Well, when you mentioned the word sadness and going as it being something going inside of yourself, I immediately thought of anger externalizing the problem.
Mm.
Well, you can be angry at yourself, but I think for the most part, or how I experience anger, it's mostly that you want to kill the other, want to destroy the other, annihilate it, utterly annihilate it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so, can the question is if we see sadness as a very truthful emotion that points at something that we can use to progress. I don't think anger is not truthful.
Oh, no. I think anger is definitely truthful. Anger is truthful. We just have to find a way
Yeah,
to interpret it that we understand that it is truthful,
yeah, yeah.
right? Because anger is like a form of it's a form of love. When you're still angry at something, there's something about it that you still love, right?
I see.
Even when somebody treats me wrong, right? I'm angry because there's something that I love that they didn't acknowledge, right? Whether it be my values, whether it be anything, there's something that I love that they didn't acknowledge. And so that's why I'm angry.
Yeah,
Um,
you want to forcefully turn it around. That's how.
exactly.
Yeah.
But it's funny. There's an ironically good example about this in the Bible. This is why I always like using the Bible, because it has such symbolic significance to like kind of understand. The story of Cain and Abel is this exactly how recognition fails. To use a living person as a form of recognition fails. I forget which one. Was it Cain, I think? Cain doesn't get recognized by his father because his brother is like getting all the benefits, basically. So he kills his brother in response, right? But then in the end, he still doesn't get the recognition, right? He still doesn't get the recognition. So it's a very, so in his anger, you can see that it's still not going to get you that recognition. So there is something truthful about it. There is something truthful about it. It's hard to say, but I feel like being angry may not explicitly show you the truth, but it shows you a contact with the truth. There is a contact with the truth, but that's very hard to sort of cipher out in the midst of being angry.
Yeah. Yeah, in the context of becoming a man, I think that it's the Jordan Peterson talks about it as a way of, you have it's not in his words, but basically you have a dialectic going on in yourself, a master-slave dialectic, or a boss and an employee, however you want to put it. So becoming a man is about becoming an authentic master for yourself. That's what I think. And on a personal note, when I experience like negative feelings, it mostly goes to sadness.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's why I'm even reading Hegel, to put it bluntly. That's why I'm doing philosophy, because if I would have externalized, and I would have been able to externalize all my negativity outward in anger, that I don't think that is. I think it makes sense that sadness is the start of philosophy in some way. This primal inward motion. Yeah, what do you think about that?
I mean, if we want to bring Hegel into it, it's the beginning of the unhappy unconscious, right?
Yeah.
It's that very beginning, right? But the thing is, what I like about Hegel, right, in my opinion, is that all through these stages that he's going to take you through the phenomenology of spirit, is that he's always going to show to you to some degree how it fails, right? How it fails. But if you think about it, we always need that failure to some degree. We always need that failure. Because then it's like, if we don't have it, then what's to love? What's to love because for me, the only way that we can sustain whatever love we have is the failure itself.
Yeah.
It's the fact that it always fails that makes love possible. Right? Because if not, we would self-identify to such a degree that no love would exist. Who are you loving anymore? There is no one to love because you have self-identified so passionately that you have become one. And then it's like, what is there to love then? There's nothing to love.
Yeah.
So it has to fail. It has to constantly fail. So that way there's always something before you to some degree.
Yeah.
And I always think of, what is it, Michelangelo's painting of Adam and God, where they're like this.
Just not touching.
Yeah, exactly. That is the pinnacle of love failing and love existing at the same time.
Yeah. The gap. Yeah.
He's like, yeah.
The asymmetry. But
yeah,
there it's tricky though, because I there's I love this dialectic that Alexander Barth has written about in one of his books. He draws from both Nietzsche and Hegel. He talks about naive nihilism, and this would be the naive belief that God is not dead, to put it bluntly. Then we have a cynical nihilism, which acknowledges the death of God and the failure of God and the asymmetry of it all, the failure of love. But also that also, cynicism is very much an ideology that the slaves uses to justify its current identity and position. It's kind of freezing. There's no motivation to go beyond it. And then the third moment, which is always a weird moment in Hegel, is what Alexander Barth calls affirmative nihilism. So it's a moment that is aware of the temporality of its naivete to go for it, go for the love, fall into it, and there it's still, even though you know that the base is failure and the future is uncertain. So is the cool question for me is like, is affirmative nihilism even a thing? Or are we just in an oscillation between naive nihilism and cynical nihilism? The presupposition is that everyone is nihilist for sure. Or we could say that everyone is the subject is a void. It's just a self-relating negation.
I always find some paradox in there, because it's like, in order to say that God is dead, you had to believe God first existed.
Yeah.
But then also, the other thing that we don't think about when we say like God is dead is that not only God is dead, but we also think how Satan died too.
Maybe he lived on.
So what kind of position is that where we acknowledge that Satan died too? That's the part that I get really interested in, because we talk about God is dead, but is Satan dead, or did he die too in this? My belief is that he died too in this, and then we get is it Hannah Arendt's banality of evil, right? Where evil becomes so banal and so common and so ordinary that we don't even recognize it anymore. So then it's like, that would make sense, right? Because then if God is dead, then so is evil. So is Satan is dead as well. And it gets us, we get put in this really weird position of obscurity. And then maybe that's the nihilism that we're talking about. I don't know. Where, so what do you think?
Zizek wrote a book called Sex and the Failed Absolute.
Mm-hmm.
It's about this failure we've been talking about, and Barth talks about the Barth absolute. Barth as in you're not allowed in it. And I feel like this is a good way to posit the open-endedness of the future. Like, you can't be cynical if the future is totally alien and unexpected. It's because cynicism doesn't expect change; it just expects the same over and over again, the same failure.
Yeah, that actually reminds me of Henry Bergson, where he talks about that the future is really unknowable. And the reason why he makes that case is because whatever we think we know is that we only use the repetition of the past to sort of assert something about the future. But again, then he says that that's not really the future. That's just what we know about the past.
Yeah.
Right. So that he's like that's still only what you know about the past. Like all those little pieces of the past that you say, oh, well, it repeats. Well, again, that's only you're not really talking about the future. You're only talking about the past in itself and how it kind of like has its sort of different manifestations or whatever. So that's why he says like the future is really unknowable in that sense. It's really uncertain. So, but actually, the Bard Absolute, that actually kind of reminds me of Kant for some reason.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, that actually does. That, I mean,
Yeah.
I feel like there's several ways to interpret Kant, and I feel like that's maybe one way to interpret it. Ibn Arabi interprets it another way, where there's like God is literally one and the many. He is one and the many in terms of the fact that like what we know about God is only his names. For example, like mercy, wrath, power, desire. We all have those like names of God within us. Like, so I have a degree of power. I have a degree of mercy. I have a degree of desire. And my purpose is to like actualize a specific aspect of God's names and so on. But ultimately, that only allows me to know God to the degree the degree that he relates to his names. There is still the unknown God, which is completely barred from us, which is the one without names.
Yeah.
Right? And this is what Ibn Arabi calls the essence, right?
Okay, interesting.
Yes. So it's God, it's God without a name. It's the completely unknowable God. And so we can't ever like get to know it because we're only ever knowing it through a specific name.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So,
in
yeah.
In Hesychism and a mystical tradition in Orthodox Christianity, there's the distinction between the energies of God, which would be its manifestations like wrath and things you already mentioned, and the essence of God, which is his own unknowability. And it directly correlates. I thought that was
no, I mean they're like mysticism in general always fascinates me because there's always a lot of like deep almost similarities between like Christian mysticism, any type of mysticism in general. There's some very deep similarities that we can find that is just very interesting in general. But what's funny is that a lot of people complain about Spinoza, right? Spinoza identified 2 attributes of God and the rest were infinite. But I think in a very inverse way, he was trying to show like that because there's so many infinite attributes, we can't really know God. There is this aspect of like unknowableness. And I think that's one way to interpret Spinoza when he talks about like these infinite attributes. That means there's so many that we can't possibly know the God itself. And it's funny because if you want to talk a lot about real relationships, right? If you're dating somebody, they will never know you as what it means to have you as a brother, what it means to have you as a father, what it means to have you as a cousin. They will never know that aspect of you because they can never have that relationship with you. So in some sense, they're always barred to some degree about knowing who you are.
Yeah. Yeah. These things they make me laugh because they are so abyssal. And that's funny. Yeah.
Was it Joseph says here, a failure of our own attention to God due to the Bard Absolute is where we find our love to God. Yep. Basically, because we can't know him and that it fails.
So what about psychoanalysis and communism also?
Well, I don't know if I can comment on communism, but because I don't know enough. I do have like the Communist Manifesto. That's as much as I
Okay,
know.
interesting.
But
Yeah.
psychoanalysis is actually very interesting because we talked about it in my book club. Is that when we talk about Freud and Jung, they actually go into this. It's funny because Freud and Jung, I feel like they show the human being as already being servants, and we don't realize it. We refuse to acknowledge that we're already servants of something, that we're submitting to something without knowing it, right? So Freud, it's the
And
instincts, right? It's the instincts that we submit to because they control us to some degree.
for Hegel too, right?
I think
Just to
so.
interject.
I can't. I feel a little bit uncomfortable saying yes or no.
Well, he calls death the absolute master.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So it's interesting that, as human beings, I feel like there's one proof of this, right? When we start talking about determinism, like everything is determined. Why do
Yeah.
we hate that? We hate that because we feel like we
Yeah.
don't like knowing that we're already submitting to some kind of fate.
Mm.
We hate that. And people hate the idea of the unconscious because that shows that there's something that we don't know that controls our actions, that controls our ideas, our responses, that ultimately we're always submitting to something that we don't acknowledge. That's that part about psychoanalysis. That's what really interests me because for me, it actually proves that as much as you deny something, we're still serving it.
Yeah, that's indisputable. Yeah, yeah. I was I find communism and psychoanalysis fascinating because
Mm.
they're very unique. They both call themselves non-religious, and I think that's so funny because for me they're definitely religious. Psychoanalysis is definitely mystical, and communism is definitely this idea of paradise, of gathering people together in a mythos uh, to go forward with it. I used to be very much identified with communism, and I'm pretty well read on it. Lenin, Stalin, Mao. Um, I really used to identify with it. About psychoanalysis and Zizek. So when I was reading about hesychasm and Orthodox Christianity, this idea about the essence and the energies, I I correlated it to the non-other and its efficacy. So there is no big other. There is a non-other, and
Mm.
insofar as there is a non-other, it has these it emanates these energies. Um,
Mm.
so
That's interesting.
to go back to what you said, in that sense we are subservient or submitted to those powers, or to
Hmm.
that power, to God.
Hmm. Yeah. No, I've never thought about communism like that. That's very interesting because
You
it
know,
would actually represent quite well when people sort of dismiss it as like, oh, it's just this fantasy. But actually, really, what you're describing is the version of paradise. And so that's very interesting to interpret it that way because it's like it almost makes me think about like there's a mystical Marx to be read in there where he's actually describing paradise,
yeah,
where we overcome our masters through our work and that we reach paradise as a community, as people.
yeah.
So that's actually really fascinating. I never thought about it like that. Um, but yeah, you're right. I mean, psychoanalysis, communism, there's always something that we are, I guess you could say, we're always submitting to. And this is the part that I like about Jung is that even though Freud talks about instincts and everything, is that for me, Jung at least acknowledges the fact that, look, you can say whatever you want about God, but there's always that unconscious aspect of you are towards God every single time. There's always that unconscious aspect of like, we are yearning for a God.
Yeah, theosis.
Yeah. And I think, was it Joseph just commented saying, Alexander Bard says you should read Marx as a Jew who wants to do an exodus.
Yeah,
Oh, that's interesting.
That's beautiful. That's
Yeah,
beautiful.
that's beautiful.
That's I was thinking actually, like, this was a while back. I never continued to develop the thoughts, but to see Marx either as a confused Jew or as a confused Protestant, since there's this Protestant work ethic, and to turn paradise to earth and install it right here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, you know, what I like about Jung is that he always critiqued Freud for having basically an unconscious God that he was looking towards. Which, I mean, it kind of makes sense because Freud always talks about the fear of his science becoming too filled with Jews. You know, he doesn't want his science to become a Jew science. So, but then the one person that he brought in, which was Carl Jung, the most non-Jew, he ended up being the person that went deep into the mystic arts, you know, deep into that muddy territory that Freud didn't want him to go into. So it's funny how, you know, all these men that we talk about, they had religious backgrounds. Freud had a religious upbringing to some degree. So did Carl Jung. I want to say Marx did too, but I'm actually not sure.
I believe he was brought up relatively secular, but he was a Jew.
Oh, okay.
You know, yeah.
So he had some contact with it.
Yeah.
But yeah, you know, this is like the one aspect of Jung that I actually feel like always needs to be brought up is like, you can deny God consciously, but there must be a sort of unconscious God that the person is striving towards. Because in my opinion, most atheists that I encounter, they're just angry. They are, in my opinion, the strongest believers. Why? Why are they the strongest believers? Because they say that the believers are the hypocrites, that they don't actually know anything, or they don't treat people with care and devotion as they should, right? And so, in my opinion, a lot of the atheists actually embrace the ethics of what it means to be like a Christian or a Muslim or whatever. And a lot of, you know, they don't, but it's because they're so angry. Anger is a form of a subversion of love. They love the religion so much that they left it because people weren't living up to its values.
Yeah, that's essential. Yeah,
that is essential. That is essential, and that's what most atheists are. They love the religion so much that people didn't live up to the values that they believed in, so they left. They were hypocrites. They didn't satisfy it. That's why they hate God and they hate religion.
Yeah, you know, Marx Marx was not a believer except for in communism, but he commented on atheists that they are like children who really are invested in proving that the boogeyman doesn't exist. Yeah, that's what Marx said.
Oh my God. You know, there's this old argument about, you know, fine, if you believe in a God, then I believe in a invisible, like, invisible meatball or whatever. And I call it God or something like that. But I always find it funny because it's like, it always shows that you can believe in something that is transcendent. That is, you can always believe in it. And this is the part that I feel like philosophy is missing. And it's this aspect of imagination. Imagination as a faculty has creative power. Creative power is your gateway, your door opening to God himself, because God himself also imagines. And Ibn Arabi, guess how Ibn Arabi describes, guess how Henry Corbin through Ibn Arabi describes God. He describes it as this. But to kind of preface imagination is not something illusory. It's not an illusion. It's not an illusion. It's not a fantasy. When we're talking about imagination, we're not talking about fantasy. That's a very important distinction to make right off the bat. But the way Henry Corbin describes it through Ibn Arabi is that God, we are in God's imagination, right? And that means everything else is an imagination, but it's real to us because we are in that imagination.
Yeah.
Right? But God exists because we can imagine God. And so we are imagining God within his imagination. Which is, I know, it's a mind fuck, I know.
Is this reality as the manifest content of God's dream?
Yeah. It's reality as representation, but it's real though. It's real to us because we are God's imagination.
Yeah.
So it's very distinct from fantasy in that sense. At least that's how Henry Corbin puts it.
Distinct from fantasy.
Yeah.
Because fantasy has this negative connotation, right?
Yes. Imagination has a negative connotation. Like, oh, you're just imagining things. Kind of like that. Imagination typically alludes to the madman, right? He's just having all these imaginings, whatever.
Divorced from reality.
Yeah. He's divorced from reality. But no, there's an actual real faculty of imagination that has creative power, that has realness. It has contact to realness. So, just think about how men have used dreams to build airplanes and stuff like that. That is the contact of the imagination faculty.
Yeah, it goes really deep.
It goes really deep.
Dreams. Yeah, it does. The table of chemical elements. This was dreamed up first.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, snap.
And a lot of Beatles songs, these were dreamed up. My dreams sadly aren't that forceful in their creative power.
But that's what I like Freud, though. And that's why I like Carl Jung, because they both take dreams seriously. And this is they are, in my opinion, they are capitalizing on the faculty of imagination, because our dreams tell us something real, don't they?
Yeah,
if we take it seriously.
No doubt.
We could always choose not to take it seriously, which would be a shame. But if we take them seriously, they always tell us something real.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I definitely. This week I had this dream. My father was in it, and he was. One dream, he was extremely angry, like extremely just savage. I was scared to death. And in another dream, I was extremely angry at him, and I was attacking him. And the physiological effective power it had on me when waking up and being like, holy shit. Yeah, it's undeniable that the dreams are very powerful and truthful, and they allude to something. Yeah. I want to go back to we were talking about communism, and the reason I want to go back to it is because recently I watched your video about dying in faith.
Oh, yeah.
And so I just told you that I used to be very identified with communism. I used to be a communist activist, doing different things, and now I've left that behind. So for me, that entire video about leaving Christian faith or Islamic faith, it was just for me it was leaving the communist faith. Um, yeah, and it definitely is still something I do think about, um, this dying in my communist faith, and how much I was invested in it. You know, this week I was walking in the city, and I met some Muslims. They had a stand, and they were converting people, and I talked with them, and this one guy told me about the miracles. You know, Muhammad made it so Allah split the moon in half and put it back together. The Sahara Desert is gonna go green again. This is something. And then they also pointed me to the contradictory nature of the Bible, how in different Bible verses, you know, you can see a clear contradiction. Uh, and when the man was telling me all this stuff, he was so libidinally invested in it, and he told me those miracles, and he believed that I would be convinced by those miracles, that I would be like, oh yes, that's so beautiful, or that's so powerful. I didn't go against it. I was just interested in it, and I asked questions about it. Um, but I also saw myself in it. I saw myself in it as the communist who was very much willing to tell other people, "Oh, I've got this great news coming for you. Have you heard about the great news yet? We are living in this conflictual class society, but this is actually the condition of possibility for a basically non-contradictory communist society."
Mm.
Um, so when I had this conversation, and I'm on the other side, you know, like having been through that, having been the one, I call it, like non-empathically penetrating the other with your exaltation. Um, yeah, I was
Oh, I
fascinated
think
by
you're
it.
cutting off, Dimitri. I think okay. I think
Am I back?
I think it's okay. Yeah, you're good now.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so where did I cut off?
You're talking about like non-contradictory communism.
Yeah,
Yeah, continue with that. Like you said that you saw yourself in
yeah,
the other.
yeah,
So on.
exactly. Yeah, I saw myself in him because I used to be very much like him, that, you know, I have the thing, I have the idea, and I have to make people aware that this idea is the thing. Um, Now when I see this, I'm like, okay, but why do you need me to be convinced? Why do you need me to believe it? I love when in the Orthodox Church, they an Orthodox priest once told me that they don't need necessarily more people in the church, because if you look around, they have all these icons, so they don't need other people to come to their thing. Whereas my experience in the Catholic Church was that this priest was talking about, oh, and pray for the people who have left the faith, which immediately shows me the emptiness of the faith, the being in need of the other who believes for you. um, so yeah, for me, like this question of like, okay, but what do we do after we die in faith? Do we get a new faith? Do we go into another naive nihilism, or do we go into like, because with the guy, for example, I was purely receptive. I wasn't going against him. I wasn't telling him about how epic Hegel is and how bright this man is, to give an example. So, what do you think about this principle of like activity and passivity? And
I think it's like for me, there's a lot of obsession with, and this is what a lot of people don't realize, is that when we talk about religion, there's the external side of religion, which is the religion that we know, the religion of faiths that we know today. Um, but then there's the more esoteric side of religion, which I wish people would explore more.
mm,
Because if you did explore that, then you would kind of understand how the God of faiths exists. You would understand why that exists. I wish I could find this quote, and it's been a quote for the longest time in my mind, but it's like I think like a mystic said it before. It was like God's mercy is everybody's interpretation of Him, or something like that, which was really amazing. Like when I thought
wow,
about it, yeah. Like so, God's mercy is everybody's various interpretations of Him. And there's even in my book club, my friend Davud quoted a thing from Rumi. It was like a poem from Rumi about a man that was praying to God, and he was saying like, "Oh God, when I love you, like I'm gonna, run my fingers through your hair and like do this other stuff." And then like a believer came up to the guy and says, "Whoa, whoa, whoa, what are you doing, man? Like that's not God or whatever." And then God approached the man that did that to him and said, he said, "What are you talking about? Uh, I was enjoying that. I was enjoying that." I'm assuming you're trying to find a book.
no. I sorry, my internet connection is bad. I just changed something. Excuse me.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, so did you catch most of that story or no?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so it was basically this man like praying to God, saying like, "Oh, I'll run my fingers through your hair, or whatever." And then like a believer was like, "Why are you doing that? That's not the actual God that we worship, or whatever." And then finally, God approached that man and said, "What?" He's like, "What? Why did you stop that man from praying to me? I was liking it. I was enjoying it. So
Yeah.
there's always something to think about, and I wish people would explore that aspect of religion, that aspect of God, because not to say that there is a purpose in sort of the more external side of religion. Like you need, like I think Ibn Rabi says, like you need to have like this aspect of like fearing God and so on. But then there's that other aspect that is kind of motherly, you could say, um, that allows our imagination to make a contact with God. And I think a lot of people sort of lack the imagination to make a contact with God. They only strictly have an external relationship to God, which becomes dogmatic. And that means they can no longer see why people believe in what they believe in.
Hmm.
They,
Yeah.
they, they, they cannot relate to it whatsoever.
Yeah. This narcissistic vanity. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
Yeah. So I it was funny for me how we started this conversation, because we started with the disagreement and I think I already said that it's, or maybe I didn't, I'm a bit tipsy now, um, that recently I've gone from I disagree and self-differentiating myself to the other, to why do you think like that?
for me,
No, to like just as an attitude.
Oh, I got you.
as a general attitude
Mm,
in philosophy, in theology, whatever it actually is.
hmm.
And um, you know, the I think the G.K. Chesterton said something akin to his um, his faith being strong because you can joke about his religion. You know, you can joke about Christianity and stuff like this, and he will laugh along with you. Whereas the dogmatic, you would just, you know, get a straight face and be morally appalled. Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm reminded of this funny story where there's a fundamentalist believer telling someone that he's a sinner, that he will not go to heaven, and stuff like this. And the guy basically tells him that no, he will get to heaven. He will get a ladder, and he will just climb up to heaven. Something akin of that nature.
Mm,
I'm butchering it, um, but the point is that it's. I feel like it's in linguistics and in attitudes. You know, our relationship to God.
absolutely. I agree. I agree with that. Yeah.
Yeah.
And for me, that's what I think about. Like when I think about like radical mercy, I think like that. I think about all the diversity of languages and all the diversity of paths that you can reach God in is a way. Even in our book club, it was said through William Chittick talking about Ibn Arabi that even wrath, even misguidance is still a form of uh, mercy and guidance. Meaning, it just takes you a longer time to get there. It just takes you a longer time. That's all. But
Yeah.
I think what's not said is that sometimes we take the longer route because we need to take the longer route because we don't know, right? We need to learn, like, for example, we need to learn the hard way.
Yeah.
Sometimes we need to learn the hard way,
Yeah.
right? And for me, that's how I would interpret hell. Hell is learning the hard way. That's all it is. Learning
Mm.
the hard way. That's why it feels like hell. It's horrible. It feels miserable. It you have to learn the hard way, but then you learn eventually, right? Um, but I hate to cut this short, Dimitri, but the beers that I had, I gotta go to the bathroom so bad. I gotta go.
Yeah, I'm actually gonna get another beer.
Um, but I think this was a good talk.
Yeah.
Um,
Okay.
and any final comments though?
Um, in some way, I'm surprised that we stumbled on the God word and the God topic. But it seems like a really. I'm glad that we stumbled upon this
Mm,
topic, because I feel like the understanding you have of it um, is constructive with my understanding of it. As someone who has not been in any faith and not practiced anything, but I have read things here and there. So yeah, I do think we hit
I'm
some
sorry,
nerves
you
with
cut
this.
off there. Say that again.
So I do think we made contact with some some interesting points in this
Oh,
conversation.
okay. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, like, it's funny. Like, my journey is that I was born Christian, right? And
Mm.
then I joined the army. I left that, and then I just dived into like every single religion you could think about. I read it all. I explored with Taoism. I explored with Hinduism. I explored with Buddhism. And then I ended up committing myself to Islam, and then I left that too. And then now it's funny because now I'm making like this great return back to I wouldn't say Christianity, but it's almost like I am wanting to re-encounter my religious childhood. And so I'm reading the Bible again because I feel like I need to confront that. I need to reinterpret, reading the Bible actually as knowing the knowledge that I have now allows me to reconfront and reimagine my childhood, which then allows me to have a completely different relationship from the way I began. So I feel like for me, that's what it actually means to die in faith. You do, like, think about, like, was it the story of the prodigal son where he spends all of his father's money and then he finally returns to his dad or whatever, and his dad's like, throw a banquet, everybody, my son's come home. It's kind of like that, where sometimes you have to leave and expend everything, expend parts of your existence, and then return back home. And so to enliven this experience. And it's funny because those that never left home, like his brothers, they got jealous and they didn't understand why his father was so accepting of his son that spent all of his money, wasted it all. They didn't understand that because they didn't die. They didn't understand what it means to die and to return back. So that's why I like reading these texts again, because what it is that I am allowing myself to have a different relationship with it. I don't necessarily have to commit myself to anything, but it's making me progress as a human being. And that's why I continue to do this, But yeah, so.
Isn't it interesting that the ones who didn't go out to actualize their notion are the ones getting resentful?
Yeah, no, that's a freaking perfect point. That is a perfect point. That is a very perfect point. And yeah. So yeah. But anyways, I don't think I can hold it much longer. This was a good talk, man. This was a good talk. I'm glad that we were able to talk about this. This variety of God, Hegel, student master, living masters, dead masters, everything. This was really good, man. I'm glad you joined.
Yeah, I appreciate you giving me the chance to come on the channel.
Yeah, no problem, man. You're always welcome. You're always welcome. All right, so I'm going to say bye to the group. And thank you guys for watching. And that's it.
Like and subscribe for more. Don't forget